On this episode of Marketing Mavericks, we talk about the beautiful game. That's right, World Cup soccer. Everything from the second screen, social media, the politics, and much more. Coming up next.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth from Marketing Mavericks is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
Welcome to Marketing Mavericks, the intersection of marketing and technology. And today, we're going to talk all about the World Cup. We're going to talk about NBA, the Hockey League. We're going to talk about so much more. And the wearables meets athletics. We're going to talk about E3, how it's happening in gaming and their conference, and much more. We've got a couple of guests joining us for the first top of the show. We've got our good friend Brain Reich, who's joining us with Little M Media. He's the managing director there. And we've also got a guest that we are excited to have joining us from the UK, Aisling McCarthy, who is with We Are Social, who handles a variety of clients, including Adidas, who's working with Soccer League, and Hotels.com, Jaguar. You guys have lots of clients. And we're going to talk mostly, I think, today about soccer, but you guys do a lot of different things. And how's the weather in the UK?
The weather is actually surprisingly glorious today. So yeah, it's actually sunny. But as always with British weather, it's super unpredictable. So it was raining yesterday, it's sunny today, who knows tomorrow. But yeah, enjoying it today.
It's beautiful here in Petaluma. So I will say that.
Good.
Brian, how's the New York weather? You guys had some thunderstorms and some tornadoes or something, right? I don't know.
Yesterday it was pretty ugly. I had a full outfit change required after taking my son to drop him off at school. It was raining so hard, but it's improving nicely. I think by the end of the day, the rain should be out of the system. So maybe on its way back to the UK, you guys can have it. It's all yours.
There's the weather report. So Brian, you and I have just been talking nonstop of excitement built around the World Cup and what's happening in sports, and you're just totally excited about everything. I know you don't know where to start probably, and I know you want to talk about what do you think? What was it, curling before? But we'll get to that later. But let's talk about the World Cup. So, World Cup is coming up, and there's a lot happening around that from a standpoint of advertising and wearables. I think it's really interesting to look at the idea of how we're using wearables and connected to the athletes and coaches and that sort of thing. So tell us for a minute, though, let's start with Aisling. What is your role in the World Cup? Like, how are you guys associated?
So We're Social, to give you some background, are a social media agency. And I've been working in social media for quite a few years. This World Cup in Brazil has been deemed the first social World Cup and the truly digital World Cup. So as you can imagine, quite a lot of our clients are gearing up with quite heavy social media marketing campaigns in the lead up to, during and after the tournament. And particularly any of our brands who are key sponsors of the tournament. So yeah, I think it's social media is really at the heart of this tournament. And so we'll have different marketing strategies for different clients. To optimize that.
So how did Adidas, which I know is one of your clients, how did they approach getting engaged with this event? And what was the strategy? Because, it's not huge here in the United States. I mean, from the standpoint of how it is across the globe and the earth. I mean, I think, we were looking at some statistics before, and just the fact that the other countries and, certainly across the globe, people are really interested in this and they tune in. So as a agency that helps is certainly on the social platform, because you have different social media outlets. You have Facebook, you've got Twitter, and in other countries, Facebook's not the primary resource. How do you approach this from a social standpoint? And then how do you approach this with Adidas?
Well, I can't go into Adidas' strategy until post World Cup, but I can definitely talk about brands overall. I mean, this World Cup, it is a global platform. You're going to have 4 billion people watching it on TV. You're going to have 3 million people attending the games on the ground in Brazil. And in terms of the overall global approach, platforms like Facebook Facebook released a report sometime recently where they stated that they have 500 million football fans on the platform. So I think that in terms of how you approach, I think, football fans are really and truly online. I've believed for a very long time that football and social media are a natural marriage. They go hand in hand. How do you approach it? I think there's two things. I think, number one, you really have to understand the digital and social behavior of football fans. That's number one. And number two, I think you really need to understand the game. I think, for advertisers and sponsors, there's so much choice out there now for fans. Advertisers have to understand the game and be authentic, and not interrupt the overall landscape. So I think it's really understanding how football fans are behaving digitally. As I said, they have so much choice. There are in the group stages there can be up to 3 games per day. This is probably the most inconvenient time zone of all the World Cups. So, we have to understand that people are going to be consuming the World Cup in lots of different ways. The big thing for this World Cup, I think, is the real-time element. So most people really want to be viewing the games live, whatever time of day or night that is for them. And so, we have to kind of understand how they're consuming the games, the second screen element, and then also point of view, what people are looking at afterwards. I think that it's understanding the game and understanding the digital behavior.
Well, and
so
go ahead, Brian.
Sorry.
No.
Well, I was going to say, it's interesting that you said it's the most inconvenient time zone for the games, because in the United States, all of the games for the first time in many, many years will be on during the day. So I think marketers in the United States have the opposite perspective from a social standpoint. I remember, 8 years ago, was it 8 years ago, when it was in Asia and I was waking up at, 2:00 in the morning to watch games, which, is fun and adventurous, but it's very different than being able to go down to the bar or similar. I live in New York City with all the fans from your favorite team and actually have that shared experience, which you're less likely to do at 2:00 in the morning. So when you think social, are you thinking, in Europe and in, a certain set of time zones, or do you have to think about it as, essentially 24 different, potential social engagement efforts, because the time of day, depending on the location of the audience, is going to influence that in some way?
I still think that for marketing it's going to be content first, but I saw a really interesting article just before I came on here, published by the guys at CNN, and it was about the increasing searches for sick tickets. So in China, they're predicting that lots of people are going to be calling in sick the next day, because obviously they're going to be watching games in the middle of the night. I think that time zones are important from the real-time marketing perspective. And lots of stats have shown that the real-time football viewers are a highly marketable bunch of people. Like they're super, super engaged. They're super social. There's lots of dual screening. So I think that for a lot of the brands that are going to be aggressively activating real-time campaigns, they need to consider time zones. Yes. For all of the other brands, they need to think kind of content first and football fan first.
Do you have a sort of a perspective on which is better? I'm curious. You mentioned before we went live that Beats was one of your clients, and Beats got a lot of news last week, just like Nike did yesterday, for this 5-minute, mini motion picture, extraordinary, sort of creative display. And at the same time, that sort of the antithesis in many respects of social in the kind of real-time way of doing things. Like, do you have a perspective as a social person as to whether or not something like that motion picture is going to drive more interest or drive more sales versus something happens on the pitch and you're able to jump on it in that moment?
Well, I suppose, I mean, if you look at the brand, I think, you need to separate the brands out here. So obviously Beats by Dre are not a sponsor. So they have a lot more, first of all, they have a lot more creative freedom and creative license when it comes to their marketing around the tournament. What they did, their creative is absolutely brilliant, and it speaks football as well, and it speaks an understanding of football. It will be very difficult for a brand like Beats to activate around in-game moments. I would say that brands like Adidas who have a natural home in the world of football are better placed to be more reactive in game and around kind of key moments. So I think it all depends around whether is it a sponsor, is it not a sponsor, what is the natural what is their natural place in the game of football. I think I don't think there's a kind of a yes or no answer to that. There's lots of different considerations. But there would be a big difference between Beats and Adidas when it comes to in-game moments and who has a natural place to respond or to react. I mean, it's worth pointing out that from a social perspective, the conversation around football is going to take place without brands. And football fans are hugely passionate and they're hugely opinionated, and it's really quick and it's really reactive. It's very difficult for brands to be involved in that conversation. In fact, it's more likely that they're going to interrupt the conversation. I think, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No. Let me pick up on that, actually. Did you see what happened earlier in the week with LeBron James and Gatorade? I
did not. I am stuck in football at the moment. Nothing else.
So the short version is in game one of the NBA Finals, for whatever reason, the air conditioning at the arena in San Antonio didn't work. So it was very, very hot. And near the end of the game, LeBron James, widely reviewed as the greatest player in the league today, if not one of the greats of all times, cramped up. His legs cramped, and he had to leave the game and wasn't able to play the final few minutes, and San Antonio went on to win the game. And Gatorade jumps on Twitter and kind of throws some shade at LeBron James, saying, maybe you should have been drinking Gatorade. And it turns out, a picture surfaced about 12 minutes later that he was, in fact, drinking Gatorade, because Gatorade is one of the lead sponsors for the NBA and the NBA Finals and the Heat and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And, it was one of those probably attempts to be like Oreo during the Super Bowl that, at very least sort of fell on their face. At worst, maybe it had some kind of detrimental effect to the brand. I don't know. As you're thinking about this from a real-time standpoint, isn't that risk very much top of mind? Isn't that something that, the brands that you work with are afraid someone's going to do? They're going to step in it and, offend Brazilian soccer fans because somebody does something stupid and they go after it and you guys go after it on social.
Well, I think there's a lot of, real time is in some ways a misleading word. Real time requires a huge amount of planning and a huge amount of scenario mapping. And, a lot of what we do is we look at all the potential scenarios that could happen in and around games. And of course, as part of that, we have a huge amount of crisis planning. So looking at the potential issues that could arise and how you would manage them and how you define an issue in social. So if we see a rapid increase in conversation around something that's happened that's relevant to the brand, how do you manage that? I think it's all about understanding the brand's tone of voice in social, the scenario mapping, how and when to engage, and having clear guidelines on that, and identifying those scenarios. And each brand is really, really different. But I think that a lot of this comes down to planning. and not, I would assume that Gatorade would have had imagined that scenario at least in their earlier planning stages.
So we've got another person joining us for the show as well. His name is Austin, I think, Schindel, and he is the director of marketing for SportTechie. Is that right?
SportTechie, yeah. Absolutely. No S, though, just SportTechie.
Okay. Welcome, Austin, to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we're talking about, soccer, and we're talking about this idea of marketing around soccer. Tell us a little bit about what you do for SportTechie.
So at SportTechie, we kind of find what we call the intersection of sports and technology. We look at every single sport, every single angle, social, sports business, and basically how they're using different technologies to enhance and improve their sports. What I do is basically look for the different trends that are going on, find our writing core to go out and do that kind of research and find who's doing the best practices and what's unique in each space.
Okay, so Brian, you and I have talked about this offline a lot, and the fact that this is such a huge space for the globe, but again, in the United States, it's not as big a deal. I mean, I think, especially if you're from the South, it's more like high school football, but around the globe, it's, half the globe is interested in soccer. So what would your question be for Austin?
Well, I would say it's a two-part question. One is, I think there's a lot of talk about, and Aisling and Tonya and I were just talking about this before you jumped on. There's a lot of talk about the marketing angles and similar, but at the core of the World Cup is still the game. And technology has had a significant impact on the game itself and the way it's played and the way that we watch it. So the two-part question I would ask is, what are the one or two or three things from a technology standpoint that you think are really changing the game or are different if you're tuning in now and maybe had tuned in 4 years ago? And the second part is, if you are a fan, but not maybe an obsessive diehard, who still believes England could win or, Brazil could lose, whatever. If you're not into just the soccer, what might we be looking for from a technology standpoint that could be really interesting? What is the fan supposed to get out of the technology experience as well?
Well, from the game itself, one thing Americans love is instant replay. And for the first time, they're going to be having goal line technology, which is hugely important if you know who Frank Lampard is and when England played Germany. That ended up being a huge controversy for the sport. And even though Sepp Blatter said that he would never use more technology, it's becoming absolutely necessary. The ball itself, the Brazuca ball, is pretty interesting. I think a lot of people will be interested about the technology that went in behind it and the amount of moisture that it has and the friction and use just incredible, they have micro textures and things like that. But as someone who's not necessarily a diehard fan, I think the U.S. did two really good things. First, they had the send-off series. Well, not for the U.S., but all the teams around the world ended up coming to the U.S. to train, get used to the heat, the climate, the summer, things like that, which I thought was hugely important. And when you look at the viral ads that they're putting out, you can't miss them and you can't ignore them. And I think what FIFA wants is, at the very least, for you to know who Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi are. So when they play well in the tournament, you're going to know who they are. And name recognition is the most important thing, because as long as you know the players and as long as you know the countries, eventually you'll go back and check which club team they're on. Then you could potentially further your interest in the sport. So from a brand perspective, it's very important that they get to know the star players and see them, and then they will see what the difference in skill really is outside not just the commercials, but when they see them on the field, they're going to realize that these guys actually are able to do these crazy things that they say they can in the commercials. So that's going to be extremely important, the success of Ronaldo and Messi actually in the World Cup.
What kind of dollars are we looking at from the standpoint of endorsements? And I mean, you look at people in soccer, even in the United States, even though it's not our potentially favorite sport, it's certainly something that we see a lot of endorsements around, and we see the most creative advertising in soccer, which is usually banned on traditional media. But what kind of dollars are we looking at compared to other sports?
You're looking at probably about, I know the exact number. I actually like to pull it up just to make sure. It's about $100 million for each sponsor at the World Cup. Now, compared to the NBA Finals, compared to, it's different because Gatorade is going to be with the NBA the entire year. But as far as the World Cup goes, they're going to go all in on a couple of players versus the overall what it does for you. So the money is more concentrated now because it's a one-time event. But overall, Gatorade and Coca-Cola, they're still putting enormous value on their other sports. That being said, Coca-Cola is still the most drank product in the world. So everybody knows who Coca-Cola is. Everybody knows who Gatorade is. Everybody knows who Adidas is. So those three, as you drink Coca-Cola, every single brand knows that they have their times where they're going to capitalize, and this is one of them.
So Aisling, we talk about the people that are watching soccer, and I keep saying that the United States isn't as intrigued as I think they should be. And you've had, in 2010, I think it was 3 billion people were actually tuning in at some point or another. And that's half of the population of the Earth, right? So how do you engage casual fans, especially from a social standpoint, especially since you think about all the different platforms that are out there and not the platforms that is certainly in the United States that we think of, but you've got a lot of other ways to engage. How do you engage the casual fan?
The casual fans. I mean, I think if you take a look at the brands who have really resonated with fans over the past week, 2 weeks, actually back since April, they are the brands that have capitalized on the human connection with the sport. So, football over here in Europe is obviously a huge, huge sport, and we have lots of different leagues. But what you see around the World Cup is you see lots of people getting behind their national teams and getting behind the game because they're supporting their nation. And, the teams represent, lots of personal stories. You're going to have rising stars on those teams. You're going to have, legends are made in this tournament. And I think it's the brands that connect emotionally with fans that are doing really well. That then should be at the heart of the marketing strategies. And then, as I said, we have so many platforms available to us in which we can tell stories, we can share various types of content, moments from the game, backstories, moments with the players, moments with, stories with the fans. So I think, the World Cup it's a global tournament. Some people will call it almost holy. And yes, it is first and foremost about the game, but it's also about the people. And so when brands, find ways to kind of bring that human element to their advertising campaigns, and then bring that through on their social platforms, I think they're the brands that are resonating the most. So,
okay, from a standpoint of marketers, and I think when you look at soccer especially, it's very emotional. When you look at the advertising, it's very sexy and emotional. And you talked about the feeling of the brand. I mean, how do brands approach this when they contact you about wanting to get engaged with soccer fans, whether it's a casual fan or the diehard soccer enthusiast? How do they approach that? Because emotions and brands can be kind of controversial.
Yeah, very. I mentioned earlier about, some brands having a natural home in the world of football, and other brands not so much. Soccer fans, football fans, as we call them here in Europe, they are a really passionate bunch. And when you're marketeering or trying to engage with soccer/football fans, you need to understand the game. You need to be authentic. So for a brand like Adidas, it's much easier, right? Because we've been a part of that world, and it's part of our heritage for a long, long time. They have a really good sense of identity, and they have a natural place. Other brands, if you take a look, obviously with the guys at Beats by Dre, they really got under the skin of the player and the emotions around that. Previous to that, they played on, I think they've done it in the US as well, they played on the the fierce rivalry between teams. So I think it's, brands who are not naturally affiliated with the game, they really need to do their research. They really need to understand what fans they're targeting and how they can target them in a natural and credible and authentic way. And I think that, brands like Beats have done that really well.
Brian, you had a question as well, right?
Yeah, Austin first, and then Aisling. I'm interested in sort of your different perspectives on this. There's a lot of political controversy swirling around this World Cup. The conditions in Brazil, the billions of dollars that FIFA will pull down as a result of staging the World Cup, and how little of that money is going to Brazil, and then also looking ahead to Qatar, where the World Cup will be staged in a few years, and the conditions there that have been brought to light. A couple of brands have started to call out FIFA for being corrupt and similar. Is there a I guess a risk for being a sponsor or a group that's involved in some way in the World Cup when there are these geopolitical issues that are present and sort of have nothing to do with your efforts to, sell a ball or sell shoes or sell soda? So I guess, Austin, I'm curious sort of from your perspective, like, who does and doesn't weigh in, and, how that kind of impacts the discussion. And then similarly, Aisling, from your perspective, you said you had sort of plans for any scenario. Do you have a plan in the back of your mind for the scenario if people turn on one of your brands because, they wake up to the fact that not everything going on in Brazil right now is, on the pitch?
Well, actually, John Oliver did an incredible bit on it. I don't know if you saw him last week tonight, but he spoke about it, and he spoke about everything that you just said and went through all of the challenges that brands face and all this. But then he went back to his ultimate point, which was football is a religion, and there's an unbelievable passion for it. And once the first whistle is blown until the last, people are still going to watch this event, and there's still going to be enormous amounts of money. That being said, there's still risk when there's so much public backlash, especially for Qatar, and that definitely might change the location. And listen, if these brands do put that kind of public pressure and put their dollars behind their voices and actually say we will not support that World Cup there and so on, it will cause actual change. But until people are willing to not watch the games or not become participants in purchasing tickets or merchandise, it's going to remain basically the same.
Aisling, what do you say to them?
I think that football is a hugely powerful game, and yes, Austin's right. The fans are not going to stop watching. However, I do think that now more than ever, brands who are affiliated with the game and sponsors are aware that they have more. They need to be more socially responsible, so they have more of a responsibility for football fans. And I think things like platforms like social media are bringing these issues to the forefront and making them more visible and more global. But I think that Austin's right. The football fans aren't going to stop watching, but I think that the sponsors are aware and are aware they need to be more socially responsible and have a voice.
So Brian, you had another question, right?
Well, yeah, I'm just I think there's so many things going on, so many different obviously brands, but also different platforms that are being used and different campaigns that are being developed. Like, Aisling, I guess you first sort of, is there a, besides your own clients, maybe fairly, is there something that you're excited to see, or there, some things that you think are going to be particularly new and innovative and compelling in the context of marketing around the World Cup, something that we should be on the watch for, something that, we should recognize as being, new and, and first? Yeah.
I mean, in terms of it's really difficult because there's so many things that are exciting about this World Cup. First of all, I think in terms of access across the board, football fans are going to get so much throughout the tournament. We never had that before, and we're going to get it, across all platforms. But we're going to get behind the scenes in the training grounds, all of that. I think, so first of all, from an access perspective, I'm super, super excited. And I think football fans have a huge amount of choice. I think that mobile obviously has presented a lot of big opportunities as well for brands. I think seeing what brands are going to do with messaging apps is going to be interesting. And I also, I just think that, the fans have more power for this World Cup. There's just going to be so much content. I think in real time, that's where we're going to be really enriched.
So speaking of sites, websites, apps, and the second screen, which you mentioned, what type of apps or sites do you think are particularly interesting in the perspective of that second screen? I mean, what are people going to be, logging on to? Is there, a specific app that's going to be really engaging for the audience?
I think, FIFA obviously have their own app. I think, there's lots of brands who've built bespoke apps like Budweiser. But I mean, football fans have, are quite specific. They will be following. I think the real-time fans will definitely have their brands of choice because they tend to engage with fans and are quite loyal. Yes, FIFA have one, but I think that outside of that, I think football fans would choose apps that are bespoke to their clubs, their players. I think we'll have to see. But yeah, FIFA have quite a good one.
Austin, what would you say to that?
So actually, Sony has a very interesting idea. It's called One Stadium, and it's almost like a Twitter almost. It's basically an aggregator, but they monitor a lot of the conversation and kind of sort through a lot of it for you. They said that they'll get rid of profanity, racist remarks. So in a way, they're kind of cleaning up the conversation for you, which is sort of unique in a way. And the fact that Sony is the one who's doing it, I think, is pretty interesting as well, because they want to drive content and be part of the conversation about their products.
So, Brian, any final questions there for Aisling?
Yeah, I guess the one last question I have, Aisling, for you is obviously who do you think is going to win the World Cup? And I'm going to put the question to you in both
fair?
sides. Soccer, you can answer England, although that may hurt your credibility. But also brand-wise, do you think there will be a clear winner who comes out and everyone will say, oh, when I thought of the Super Bowl, Oreo won the Super Bowl because of their incredible real-time thing. Is someone, do you think, naturally positioned to win the World Cup from a brand standpoint as well? But team first, because I'm not letting you off the hook.
Team first. Well, I'm Irish, so I'm not going to say England they're going to win the World Cup. I don't know. It would be I think if Brazil don't win the World Cup, we talked about passion. I'm going to go Brazil. I'm going to say Brazil based on passion of the fans. That will drive it. So that's the first question answered. The second question in terms of brands, who will win? I think there's going to be more than one brands winning here. I think that there will be some surprises. Always with the big tournaments, you have kind of smaller brands that have a little bit more creative license and tend to surprise. I think we need to watch out for some of the smaller brands. I think there will be the real-time battle, and I honestly don't think that we can answer that until we start pulling up towards the final. Naturally, I would think that Adidas are very well placed to do really well there. So I think we need to watch. I think we need to watch the real-time game, and I'm going to vote Adidas on that one. And then I think in terms of the non-sponsors, we've seen brands like Beats do really well so far. I think Coca-Cola with their The World Is Ours campaign is a really nice way of tapping into football fans. But yeah, I think we always need to watch out for the surprises. So I'd like to do a follow-up after the final and see who we're talking about then.
Well, you just put yourself out there. We're totally going to do that. So, Austin, how would you answer that question? I think, Brazil is a safe answer. Come on. I mean, they're always...
Brazil, they're definitely, I assume, going to get a little bit of home cooking. I imagine that there's definitely going to be a definite... I think Brazil is definitely one of the three teams that can win it. I still think that Spain is the team to beat. I'm a little biased because I love that. I love that team, but I still think that Spain is the team to beat. I think that Nike is actually going to come out on top because I think in the game of Neymar and Ronaldo versus Messi, they're going to see more success on their end, while Argentina will definitely get out of the group stage and Portugal may not. Neymar will carry the brand for them, along with Iniesta, along with Rooney. And I think that they're going to end up being, because of their risk, I think the Risk Everything campaign was amazing. It's been incredible anticipation leading up to the World Cup, and I think Nike always has tricks up their sleeves.
Okay, I'm going to ask you both to put yourself out there a little bit. I mean, what's going to be the dark horse? What's the big upset that you think what's going to happen? What do you anticipate is going to happen that's going to like shake things up? Go first, Aisling.
Shake things up. I mean, with every World Cup or every tournament, there's always something, isn't there? Something bespoke to that tournament. I don't know. I mean, the Brazilian fans are a unique breed, shall we say. I think we're going to see, I don't know, really. I think that we're going to see some really interesting things from the fans. There's going to be some interesting trends, mascots, things like that. So I think we need to watch out for the fans. I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, really, because in football, you always have your standard surprises almost, right? So we always have our pitch invaders. We always have, surprising riches from the fans. We always have players misbehaving badly on social. I'm going to say we need to watch out for the Brazilian fans. I think they're going to entertain us for this World Cup.
Okay, Austin.
I think in the same light, but a little bit different than that. The vuvuzelas really defined what happened in South Africa for the casual fan. That's all they kept talking about. So I'm very interested to see what the Brazilian communities look like and what actually goes on around the World Cup. And if everything looks perfect like they wanted to, or is there a little bit of protest, things like that. I think that the Brazilian people are really going to define a lot of what happens there.
Well, I'm excited to see it. I mean, so this is the mystery to me, and I guess I just don't understand why this can't be more popular in the United States. I mean, why as a country are we not more excited about soccer as the rest of the globe, Austin?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think first and foremost, we don't grow up with a ball on our foot. We grow up with one in our hands. Even when I play soccer once in a while, I feel the urge to stick my hands up because it's just the way it is. I think a little bit of the formatting is different too. Group stages, Americans aren't really used to group stages and playing round robins and things like that. I know a lot of Americans don't love the fact that it's not sudden death, overtime. Once hockey got rid of ties, it became more popular, and I think that Americans don't really understand the whole ties element. And finally, the fact that it's a team sport. You're still going to have superstars, but anyone who knows and loves football, I'll start calling it football, is that you need your complementary players around your stars to be also incredible. And in American sports, you see a lot of individual dominance, and I think that's lost on a lot of U.S. fans who try and watch it. And also, just one more thing, the fact that there's no commercials, Americans do love commercials, and sitting there for 45 minutes might seem a little tedious to some Americans who are used to getting up in between, especially football games, every kickoff, and it gives them that break. Well, you really have to pay attention, and it's more of a continuous flow.
That's a really good point of view. And Aisling, what is your final thought? I mean, would you agree with that?
I mean, I think that, what's the difference? I can't speak from the US perspective. I can speak about football here in Europe. And just all I can say is just that the passion for that game, it truly is. It is a global sport. It's a global language. Football is a platform for, obviously, it's skill, it's performance, it's teamwork, but it's also behind that, it's moments, it's cultures, it's backstories. People are obsessive about football, and it's tribal here in Europe. I honestly don't know why. I mean, it's an interesting point in advertising. I think that, as you said, it's a 90-minute game and we have half time. And I think even during the half time, advertisers are fighting to claw back the attention of the football fan who's going off to grab a quick beer or have a break, because all attention is on the 90 minutes on pitch. In terms of the difference, I don't know why. I can only speak for what I can see, which is the passion for the game here. But I think the advertising point's really good. And here in the UK or in Europe, the halftime is also quite tricky for advertisers.
I want to thank you for joining us. I know this is big busy time for you, and we appreciate your point of view. And we will have you back after the event to talk about what happened and what was the outcome of all the great advertising. Which I think, again, I say the advertising for football, if you will, for soccer, is so much. It's, I don't know, it's sexier. I think it's more intriguing than any of the other advertising. And I want to see how that really pays off. And thanks again for joining us. And we're going to talk more with you later.
Thank you. Bye.
Absolutely. So we have Geoff Collin joining us. He's the social media influencer at Microsoft. And he's going to talk. Hello. Welcome, Geoff.
Hey, Tonya. How are you this morning?
We're fabulous, talking a lot about soccer. I know something you're super passionate about. So let's talk about, your role at Microsoft, and especially in the way of advertising and social. And one of the big things that we were talking about is the fact that, even though like in 2010, we saw 3 billion people participate, those people aren't, citizens of the United States. And how does that really impact your brand? How do you approach engaging from the standpoint of a brand like Microsoft? How do you approach that with fans?
Well, I mean, you have to think about the fact that, the globe, the world at large is really what we have to consider in this day and age. I think, at the age that I'm at now, I remember being very young and sporting events really were all very U.S. centric. And social media now allows the globe to participate almost as one room in sort of talking about these events, which is a lovely thing. You get to really see a viewpoint that's different from yours from around the world. And I think, brands like to leverage that. Most brands are global at scale and want to sort of talk to the world as a whole. And I think, you only have so many big events that are global if you think about it. This one happens every 4 years. I know we also look to the Olympics, but I think you just have to, I think, a lot of brands, even if they're not sponsors of this particular event, will be busy monitoring what people are saying and trying to sort of inflect their point of view, so to speak, around what might be happening.
So, you guys have a lot going on with E3. Are you following that right now, by the way? I mean, of course you are, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a casual gamer, but I have a lot of friends who are hardcore about it, and they're like, "Hey, Jeff, have you heard this? You see what's going on here?" It's a big event. I think the event itself is really trying to speak to more than just the hardcore gaming community. So it's a big one on the calendar, and in terms of a number of different video game companies.
So what's actually the perspective of your company when it comes to looking at advertising? And we've talked a lot about when you guys launch products, and how do you listen to fans since your goal is social media there at Microsoft?
I mean, it's hard to speak for every single product because there's so many that come, it's such a large portfolio here. But I think the best social media marketing is not talking, it's listening. And if you think about it, Tonya, I mean, we've talked a lot. The best, I mean, your best friends are the ones that listen to you because you're able to talk to them and say, hey, here's what my issue is, or what problems I have, or I want your perspective. And I think in a lot of respects, the best brands are now becoming really good listeners in the respect of, hey, what do our advocates really want, and how can we provide that for them? I think in this day and age now, customer dialogue is really important, and hearing what a customer has to say is key. But of course, giving more than just what the customer wants is important because, as Henry Ford said, if he asked his customer what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse. So you have to be very innovative in this day and age in terms of also thinking maybe where people might be going, but also providing what they really want out of the the relationship. It's weird that we now think of marketing as a relationship compared to what it had been for the last 50 years, which was almost like a dictatorship. Hey, we say, and this is what we provide, and this is what you get from us, and we're the best. And I think a lot of brands did that, regardless of what category they were in. And now, brands now have to say, hey, we can't go with that dialogue. We can't dictate to our customers what they necessarily want. We have to listen to see what they're really interested in. And I think in some areas it's very unique. If I was running a car company, I'd really be listening quite a bit, just because I think there's a lot of features that are put in cars that aren't really necessary. But I think there's just a lot of areas for product improvement. And I look at social now in terms of the future as really being the new product assembly line. Your customers really are the ones that are giving feedback that can be rolled into your product, whether it's a soda, whether you're in tech, whether you're in health, whatever it might be. So all areas, it's really key.
We've got Chris Baccus, who's joining us. He's been on the show before. He's Executive Director of Digital at GolinHarris. Welcome, Chris, to the show.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for having me.
You're going to be attending E3 today. Super excited. I'm jealous. I want to go there.
Well, it's a lot of fun. I was there yesterday, too. And, of course, a lot of press conferences going on. We actually are right now running our live stream for Nintendo, one of our clients. And, it's such an event. And Geoffrey just brought up, automotive. We talked a little bit about gaming. I, of course, come from the automotive space where I spent many, many years working for several brands. And the gaming space is just like E3 is like an auto show times 100. It's just amazing. And it's just a fascinating kind of event. It's a very passionate audience. I mean, the hardcore gamer is your biggest fan, but also sometimes your biggest critic too. And that's the case with a lot of industries anyway, whenever you're kind of talking about who the hardcore fans are. But what's fabulous about what's happening within gaming is that it's really trying to be much more broad. This whole idea of kind of ownership of the living room, becoming this entertainment device, both handheld, console. Certainly there's a lot of mobile stuff going on as well too. And it's just such a fascinating industry, to be honest. And E3 is just the culmination of everything, like rolled into just a gigantic big feast of gaming for a few days here in Los Angeles, which was a blast.
Brian, you had a question, right?
Yeah. Hey, Chris. Hey, Jeff. So I'm curious. I know both of you are thinking about, and we were talking about before you guys jumped on, a lot about real-time marketing, social and otherwise. And I guess, Jeff, Microsoft, unless I'm mistaken, right, has no direct connection to the World Cup, right? There isn't a soccer per se sponsorship, but there's still clearly opportunity for you guys in listening to what the audience is talking about or in pushing certain products and similar. How do you make that connection? And then Chris, because I know you work a lot in real time and think about real time as well. How would you sort of, I guess, follow on whatever Jeff ends up saying in terms of, brands that are coming in from the outside, right? Those that are not on screen the entire time or front and center in the lives of the fans who are consuming this event like the World Cup. How do you create relevance, or how do you create opportunity and decide to do that instead of maybe, taking the month off and letting everyone else, fight about it and spend their money in a very crowded market? Jeff, why don't you start?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I mean, these are great. It's a great question. No, Microsoft does not have a FIFA sponsorship. So we know that there's several brands that actually pay FIFA to get a lot of airtime around the World Cup. The thing is, I find that to be a traditional sponsorship that's sort of antiquated, because most of the action, and I'm sure you spoke about this, is going to happen on social networks where there really is no ownership. FIFA has been trying to sort of control that messaging, saying, hey, if you're going to actually mention the World Cup, you have to pay us. I don't think they really understand how Twitter or YouTube or Facebook or how these networks actually work. But you're going to have a lot of activity, a lot of guerrilla activity, a lot of information jamming, as I like to call it, from third-party brands that have nothing to do with a sponsorship that are going to try to call attention to it. Some are going to be very quirky and not very realistic, and there'll probably be a lot of social media watching in terms of brands that fail in terms of their messaging around the World Cup. I think the relevancy is, you have a global event, and my point of view on it would be, how do you power an event like that? I mean, obviously, it's all powered through computing. I would hope that they're using cloud computing in some respects. So maybe there's relevancy in terms of, how Microsoft can talk about cloud computing, which is a big area, talk about mobile, but also in terms of where I am in terms, search advertising. I mean, I think the big thing is there's going to be a lot of people just searching in real time. I think there's a tendency for much of us in social to think that the second screen activity that happens the most is on Twitter, when in actuality, most people actually search when they're watching television. So I think one of the big things is, how does search play a huge role around this World Cup? How are people using Bing in some respects to find out information? What images are they looking for? What data are they looking for? Are they looking up players that are on different national teams as they're watching it in real time on television? Is there a spike in sales around football or soccer equipment, cleats? There's a lot of things that can be looked at in terms of the data. And I think that's a big area that I would push toward. We did actually from a Bing Ads perspective, we put out a world football advertising guide for search marketers. So we actually we wanted to be contextually relevant heading into the World Cup. It's already a little too late if you're doing that when the World Cup starts. We actually pushed it out last month so search marketers could take advantage of the fact that a lot of people are going to be looking up a lot of different terms around soccer, football, and different countries, and the fact that Brazil will probably be searched quite a bit. And I think the tourism board there is probably going to make out very well in terms of people planning trips in the future to go to Brazil.
Okay, so Austin, you've been awfully quiet. What do you think is the big opportunity for advertisers in this space?
Well, I think that, like he was saying, even non-official sponsors are going to have a lot of opportunities to become part of the conversation just by using their social channels, have the Oreo moment. But I think that sponsors are going to see, especially the Adidas and Nike, they're going to see an enormous upswing in sales of their new jerseys and boots, because they really have put incredible technology into them, making them lighter and making them faster and making them seem like they are geared towards an individual style of play and an individual style of player. So it's almost like they have made different shoes for attacking players and for people that control the game, they say, and people that are defenders. So I think that sponsors are, especially in that space, are going to have a great opportunity to take advantage of the aftermath, and the players that do well in the game are going to therefore translate into higher sales. Things like Gatorade and Coca-Cola, they're always going to find the same probably return on a lot of their investment, because people are still going to drink Coke. It's a lot more about sentiment and a lot more about feel, and especially for Gatorade, they just put out an ad with the Brazilian team saying how this new drink that they've had is they're using technology to measure how hydrated players are, and that they're going to want that technology and that that stuff to go down to lower levels, to MLS, to leagues, to even youth and college levels. So they're going to really be looking towards after the World Cup and seeing, well, now that we've displayed, it's almost like a showcase and a display of all their new products, and now the market is going to open up for all these products.
So to go along with what Austin's saying, you have the major brands who are capitalizing on the event, and there's certainly a lot of opportunity. And Chris, I've heard you talk about how sexy the advertising is, and and I think it is. I think it really sucks you in, and most of it isn't even. You don't even see it here in the United States. What would you say about that? The big advertisers and their opportunity, but also what about the little guys that have a smaller footprint but are interested in being engaged? Like, what's their opportunity?
So sexy, huh? Yeah. So is that the word I used? No, that's cool. No, it's I think what's interesting and kind of what we were talking about before the show was Super Bowl advertising and World Cup advertising are these big moments where people do pay attention to ads, and most of the times we don't want to pay attention to ads. We like to go ahead and fast forward things. We're not used to going in and watching a commercial for Nike for 5 minutes online. I think from little guys' perspective, Beats did an amazing job. It depends on how you define little guys. Let's assume they don't have the Apple money yet. They had a great disruptive kind of ad that really kind of got back into the passion of the game. And, I was thinking about this before the show of what really makes the World Cup advertising so fascinating compared to what's happening within Super Bowl advertising. I think the main component is Super Bowl's just gotten into this whole idea of being ridiculous. Who can make the most silliest, memorable, laugh out loud kind of ad? World Cup is very different. World Cup is about the sport. Every single ad you see has a sport front and center in it. It has the whole idea of the passion, the whole idea of almost like an Alger Hiss kind of story inside every single moment of it, of, coming from nothing to greatness. So it's very aspirational, and it really creates that triumphant heroism kind of story that's there. And it doesn't matter whether it's a small company or a big company, everyone's trying to capture that whole moment of what it means to be a footballer. And the great thing of World Cup, of course, is they obviously have a very international audience and a wide range of teams. So, we're very limited within Super Bowl of 2 teams. There's, not a lot of focus on the teams or even the sport in the advertising world when football advertising happens for Super Bowl. But World Cup, it's all about those players, all about those moments. And there's so many characters, so many personalities, so much content to really work off for any kind of brand to find some relevancy into how they kind of fit back into why they're there in the World Cup. So I think that's what makes it so fascinating and different. I kind of wish that Super Bowl advertising would get a little bit more back to the root of the sports, the players, the enthusiasm, the heroism. And I think that's become really lost, unfortunately, because it's just about kind of kicking someone in the nuts half the time.
Oh my God.
So thank you for bringing that up. I have a follow-up on that, and I don't want to be. I'm often the guy who disses advertising, sort of for this reason. I think you're right. The World Cup ads are totally different, and even just in format and structure. We were talking in the first half of the show about the 5-minute Nike ad, which is like a Pixar film about passion for the game, and the Beats ad, which all the at least trade coverage has been it's going to give you chills, and it was an incredible ad, but I guess if part of the argument about something like a Super Bowl ad is that it's lost focus on almost anything, and the criticism is it doesn't help you sell product. So a funny ad doesn't help you sell cars or soda or whatever. Does a passionate, authentic, tied to the beauty and the power of the game ad get you any closer to selling headphones or shoes? I mean, I sort of unfortunately came to the conclusion a long time ago that I was not going to be, a world-class soccer player. And so while I certainly enjoy, suiting up for a casual game every now and then, I'm not necessarily going to drop hundreds of dollars on a pair of cleats because I see, one of these extraordinary players make a ridiculous move. I recognize that it's not the cleats, but is that just sort of a silly, overly cynical view? Does this passion for the game, this Pixar film or whatever, inspire enough loyalty or interest or whatever for the brand that people will actually buy it? Or is there a totally different intent, to this advertising that, I'm, like I said, probably too cynical to embrace?
Well, remember, we're industry people, so we're going to be cynical just because we're part of the industry. So we're not always the best focus group. But, I think to that point, there's some products that can't break through. I think one product that's been fairly interesting is the Adidas soccer ball, which has a certain style to it. They've really kind of made it a showcase of it. I believe it even has its own Twitter account and things like that. But, but it's kind of making something feel special. I mean, listen, there's a whole bunch of people on golf courses who have a bunch of Callaway clubs who have no reason buying that kind of level of equipment. It's the same thing with a lot of sports. So, it isn't always about necessarily making you feel like you're going to exactly be like that and perform at that level of a professional, but you want the illusion and you want the essence of kind of being able to kind of fit into the love of the game, the respect for the game, the whole idea that if I have quality tools, things are going to be better for it. All these things are trying to come into play for people who, just want to be part of the experience. And a lot about advertising is about lifestyle and how you kind of fit that lifestyle back into someone's personal experience. And I think it comes through in a lot of the advertising. Whether it makes you buy, that's your own personal decision. But yeah, a lot of people don't.
I want to say that, you talk a lot about the passion passion, and that comes through in the advertising. But I think the passion is in the sports. We actually saw that with American football, right? With the Super Bowl, and whether you like them or not, the Seattle Seahawks and the passion, the 12th man kind of concept. We saw a glimpse of that here in the United States, and you saw that come through in advertising, but not to the extent that we see that in soccer. Why can't we embrace that, to your point, when it comes to our own advertising? Because I think the consumer would absolutely get behind that. Chris?
Well,
Yeah. Okay. I'll jump in again. So I was giving someone a little pause.
Everybody's like, oh, you know.
It's all cool. Yeah. First of all, the Seattle game was atrocious. Well, they just annihilated.
Okay. Nobody's jumping in. And hey, I have to say that, Jeff, you're from Seattle, right? So, like, come on.
It was atrocious as a game. It was not very exciting to watch. I think about after halftime, everyone was pretty much checked out.
As a Seahawks fan, I will contest that. It was an extraordinary display of strategy and physicality and dominance over a very good team. That's what you want. You want an extraordinary team to play at an extraordinary level, and that's what the Seahawks did. Side note.
Yeah, it was a boring game to every other fan. Great game if you were a Seahawks fan. Let's say that.
Well, so how does that affect advertising? I mean, how do advertisers capitalize on that? Because you had, even if you look at that game specifically, you look at Sherman, who is very controversial, and then you've got Russell, who's super straight laced, and he's got you guys are supporting him at Microsoft, right, Jeff?
We are. Yep. He's doing advertising for our Surface product.
So how do advertisers get behind the passion? Anybody?
Well, I think there's a difference. I think there's a difference between passion and controversy, and sometimes they kind of teeters on that line with Americans versus internationals. A lot of these players are gods overseas, especially if you look at a guy like Neymar. Like, he can't do any wrong, but Richard Sherman is passionate. And he's considered controversial. So especially if you look at what Beats did, they kind of turned that controversy and turned it in and it flipped it on its head, and that became an incredible campaign for them. I think that's what's kind of difficult for a lot of U.S. brands is the passion is also, when you show a player that's displaying passion, he or she is usually working extra hours in the field, and that's how they market towards us, is to show these are the people that work harder, not necessarily that what their skill levels are comparable. It's just what they're doing on and off the field.
Let me follow up on that. And Austin, we talked about this in the first half of the show for Chris and Jeff. The other side of this is that there is a sort of geopolitical undertone to an event as big and as global as the World Cup, and specifically the conversation about the economy in Brazil and the working conditions in Qatar, where the next World Cup is going to be staged. A couple of brands, interestingly, including I think it was Adidas, this week publicly encouraged FIFA to investigate. Basically said, look, we're spending a ton of money. We think that it needs to be, that the World Cup selection process needs to be fair, that the construction in Qatar, needs to respect human rights and all of those things. To me, it goes beyond corporate social responsibility and kind of being a brand that you can respect. And it goes right at the heart of, sort of potentially using your influence to have a demonstrable impact on some kind of controversial or socially important issue. Is that also an opportunity from your guys' perspective to position a brand in a good way? I won't put you on the spot from a Microsoft standpoint, but obviously Bill Gates and Microsoft have had a lot of influence on education and a number of other things, and there are all sorts of inequalities that they could weigh in on in relation to something like the World Cup. From the marketer perspective, do you consider that a good strategy? Is that too risky? Is that refreshing and maybe everybody will go in that direction? What's your take on brands getting into the dish, if you will?
Getting into the it's and that is a good term. I think a lot of it. I think a lot of brands now. I mean, in the past, no one wanted to be controversial. It was all about brand stewardship. I think now you almost in this day and age of social media, whether brands want to or not, you have to take a controversial viewpoint on many things. Why do you have to do that? Because that's the only way that people are actually going to sort of maybe raise their head and notice you. If you try to sort of go the straight and narrow path, so to speak, it's really hard to be discovered if you think about it. I mean, I even think about the fact that, recently with the Apple Beats acquisition, Apple was not happy with that Dr. Dre video where he was, said he was going to be the first billionaire from hip hop. A lot of these companies are very competitive. They're Fortune 500. They have shareholders. They're very cautious of how things, how people will act and react. But then you have a lot of upstarts that really, they want to get noticed, and they're going to pretty much do anything, to get noticed. Obviously, a good example was that toy company that was using Beastie Boys music, and then of course they said they were going to sue the Beastie Boys. That was all a strategy. That was a strategy just to to get noticed even more. I think there's a time and a place for that, but I don't think you always have to be, you always have to go down the controversial path. I think, depending on what your company does, I think it's good to actually state your claim with maybe controversial points of view in terms of thought leadership, like, hey, this is where we think things are moving, even if a lot of people are going to be like, they're out of their minds, they don't know what they're talking about, because that's a way to drive debate and conversation. And ultimately, debate is how we learn more, and we become more curious and we question things. In terms of the World Cup, I do see things that are going to be controversial. I mean, we know brands are just going to do that, to draw attention to themselves. I think the big thing that, a brand could do around the World Cup that I find fascinating is, soccer really is the people's game. And I think, anyone can sort of play it. It doesn't require a lot of equipment. It has always been sort of said by many people, almost has sort of these Marxist, communist sort of ties, which I think maybe why Americans always don't like it as much. It's not as individualistic in some respects. If I was a brand, I would actually, try to drive that point home where it's, it's more about the team than the individual, because that's controversial to a lot of people in some respects. But, at the same time, it's not, because we're always told in business you can't really get anywhere by yourself, that you have to get somewhere with others. But
I would agree.
Yeah. So,
well,
hey, Tonya, I got to drop actually, but I really appreciate your, having
absolutely.
me part of this.
Thank you so much. And if somebody wants to connect with you, Jeff, how can they do that?
On Twitter at DJGeoffe. Happy to chat with more people about soccer and tech and all the wonderful things about the Pacific Northwest. And thanks again, Tonya. I'm sure you and I will speak soon in person.
Absolutely. And Austin, if somebody wants to connect with you, how can they do that?
On Twitter at Austin Schindel, or at SportTechie, which is no S, SPORT Techie, or austin.schindel@sporttechie.com.
And Chris, if somebody wants to connect with you, how should they do that?
Twitter's a great way. C Baccus, CBACCUS.
And Brian, my good friend. And if somebody wants to follow you and what you're saying about, I know you're super excited about the sport, and as well as others, including some that we didn't get to today, which is basketball and hockey. How can they do that?
You can start on Twitter at BRIANREICH, or Google me, or whatever. I'm easy to find and happy to be found.
And that wraps up another episode. Sadly, we have to end this because we have another show following us. Tech News Today is coming up. But if you guys have questions and you want to find out more about the show, you can actually email me at mavericks@twit.tv, or you can use the hashtag on Twitter, Marketing Mavericks, or find me on Twitter at Tonya Hall Radio. I know I need to change it, and I'm working on that. So everybody have a great day, and thanks for joining us. This time, we'll see you next week.